everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are bringing you the first garden update of 2021. We have actually been gone for a week and a day now. Just came back a couple hours ago. I came out to the garden just to see how much it had grown and changed, and I noticed several things that I need to get done ASAP, and I just wanted to bring you along and show you where we're at with our garden. So the first thing we'll do is just kind of check out the garden, what we're doing different this year, what we have planted, how it's going, and then we need to tackle our tomatoes. If you're not familiar with it, tomatoes have suckers. They will grow suckers on them, and I had all of them pinched before we left, and in that time frame that we were gone, several have come back and appeared, so I need to take care of that sooner rather than later. And if you're new to pinching the suckers, or why we need to pinch the suckers, or even how to pinch the suckers, stay tuned after the garden update and I will show you exactly what that is. But for now, let's see how things are going this year. One of the major things that we are trying out this year that we're doing different is the use of this woven weed barrier fabric. Be on a lookout for a video on what exactly this is and how you put it down and get it garden ready. But moving right along, as you can see as I'm walking through the rows here, these are our rows of green beans. Now I am succession planting the green beans. I have 2 rows out right now, and the germination was really rough with these. I had some green beans from last year, so I planted some of those, and I had a couple other bags, and it just, with all the rain that we've had, the soil was just way too wet. Some of them rotted, some of them just didn't germinate. So I've got several holes that I need to fill in, go back and replant. Looking at the corn, the 4 rows of corn that I have planted, they were even worse than the beans. I went ahead and replanted all of those rows with brand new seed from this year. I'm not even going to mess with any of the seed from last year. In the upper garden, I am trying out radishes for the first time. These were kind of succession planted as well. This is one of the oldest ones here. We'll see how they do. The onions, I have 1 row of onions that I planted a while back. They're looking pretty good. And then I did add in another row of onions on the other side of that same garden, just a couple rows over. So we've kind of succession planted the onions as well. I'm really curious on how the onions do in this weed fabric barrier. Here's our cucumber plants, and lo and behold, a volunteer tomato plant from last year. Sunflowers are brand new this year. I only had to redo one. You can see right there it's a little small. They really took off that week that we were gone. I would say they grew almost a foot, if not more. Even starting to get a little head on the sunflower plant. Another new one for us are snap peas. I'm really hoping the heat of the summer doesn't take these out, because I've recently become fond of snap peas. Can we just appreciate all the blooms on this blackberry bush? This is like a treat when we're working out in the garden, to have blackberries just right here at the reach, grab a couple, eat them, continue on working in the garden. So that's exciting. So every year we try to do something a little different, just to kind of educate ourselves, learn as we go, kind of experiment. And this year we are experimenting with the weed barrier. Now, I have researched this multiple times. I've watched people with it. It seems to be ideal, but we will see, and time will tell. And what I'm just doing now is I'm kind of weeding through the carrot section just to pull any weeds. The carrots are still pretty small, so they're going to be competing with weeds if I don't kind of stay on top of it. So I'm just kind of weeding through what I can to give the carrots ample room. And then once the carrots kind of get larger and taller, they should shade out the weeds and I shouldn't have to do this. One thing we have really struggled with this year here in Missouri is weather. It has been such a wet spring. And I think if we wouldn't have these barriers down, I'm not too sure we would even have anything in the garden. So I think we kind of lucked out there. There we go. We'll head down to the other end. One thing I'm really trying to be more conscious of and make a better effort of this year is the use of insecticides. I quit using Seven Dust a couple years ago. I have used diatomaceous earth. I'm even hoping to not use that as much, just because we put in a hummingbird garden, we've put in a bee garden, we want the pollinators for our plants, especially for the garden, and I feel like whenever I use diatomaceous earth, that's still causing harm to those pollinators that I'm trying to attract, and I want to take care of them as well. So I'm actively researching ways that I can help control the unwanted pests in the garden. I know I can come out here and handpick, and I will do just that as much as I can, but sometimes even that's not enough. So if you have any suggestions on insecticides that I can use in the garden for the plants when it comes to it, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. I would love to hear what can be used, what people have had luck with. Just looking around, I know I've got something eating my basil. The beans usually get hit. The Japanese beetles like to feast on the blackberry leaves. I haven't seen any of that yet, but I know that time is coming. That's in every year, you can guarantee it. Of course, there's always the tomato hornworm, which, if I'm honestly speaking, knock on some wood, we haven't had too many issues with that. I think last year I had 2, and I seen it. I caught it early enough that I took them and I gave them to the chickens. And I know they can be beneficial as well once they go through their evolution phase. But when it comes down to it, I would rather keep my tomato plants. I know that sounds bad, but I'm just speaking honestly here. So if you have any suggestions, like I said, just leave them in the comment section below, because I'm still in the learning phases of that. Luckily enough, I come out here every day, sometimes multiple times a day, so that's why I am able to catch them at a decent time frame and handle the situation. And another thing is, do you just treat it when you see it, or do you try to stay ahead of the game and spray the plants or the garden beforehand in hopes that they never show up? I'm curious. Just comment below and let me know. I'd love to hear from you on that aspect.
What's that? Are you a Oh!
Someone else likes the fabric too. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. Hey!
What do you think of that?
Hey, Fro, come out here!
Okay, one garden down, the big one to go. So we're gonna come down here and take care of the tomato plants, and then I'm going to do some replanting of the beans and corn. It was seed from last year, and the germination rate just was not very good. You can save seed from year to year, and just know that your germination rate will be down. I took a chance, and we had better luck than last year, but not as good as luck as I thought. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that reseeded while I've got the time, and hopefully that can start coming up and we will have better luck and better germination rate. The temperatures, I think, are still supposed to be in the 70s, so it's not going to be extremely hot, but at least it's going to be clear and maybe not as much rain. So I'm going to turn you around and I'm going to show you the tomato plants. Okay, we are here at the tomatoes, and I've got a real good example here of a very large jet setter tomato plant. When we left, this thing was maybe 18 inches to 2 foot tall. And now I would say this thing is probably pushing 3 foot tall. This thing has really gotten big since we've been gone. But I want to show you the suckers, and one, how to locate them, two, what we need to do to them, and a couple other things that I like to do with my tomato plants. Okay, here is our very large jet setter tomato plant, and a sucker occurs in what we like to call the pit of the stems and branches of a tomato plant. So this here, the main stalk, and then we have our leaves coming off, and then in between we have a sucker. So right here, it's kind of growing in the armpit, I guess you could say, of the tomato plant. And they can occur this size, which isn't bad. And then they can be, let's see if I can find one here, big like this. Here's another fairly large one. You'll notice down here, before we left, I was already getting rid of some of the suckers. So this is just where I have taken the suckers off previously. So exactly what is a sucker? A sucker is really just another plant growing within a tomato plant. You can actually take the sucker, I'll take one off here, one of the bigger ones. So here's a sucker that I just pulled out of the pit of this tomato plant. You can actually take this sucker, put it in some water, it will grow roots, and you have another plant. Kind of where they got the name sucker, because it sucks all of the energy, the nutrients from your main tomato plant as it's trying to grow another plant. So you want to pinch the sucker so that its energy isn't going into growing another plant, it's going into producing fruit and blossoms and a much healthier original plant that you put in the ground. I might come out here every couple days and check them. If you wait until these get too large to pinch them off or to get rid of them, you'll actually end up doing a little bit more harm to the plant and maybe better off just leaving them in there. That's why ideally you want to take care of these early when they're small, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. And I'll show you an example here of one that I'm going to leave, just because I'm afraid if I try to take it off, it's going to do more harm than what I want for the plant. Let me turn you back around and show you a little bit more here. Okay, right here. Let me move my tomato clip. I will link these down below. I got these off of Amazon. These work perfectly. You don't have to worry about tying your tomato plant, and as you can see, I just take it off, and as the plant grows, you just reattach it elsewhere, and it keeps your plants stabilized to the trellis or whatever you have it on. And then as this part grows up, you just remove it and keep going up with it. Okay, back to our sucker. So here's a sucker growing in the armpit, I guess you could say, the pit of this plant. You're just going to pinch it off. There it is. I will not be using this as another plant. I don't need any right now, but ideally, put this in some water, get it some roots, and you have already another probably 8 to 10 inch plant you could put back in the ground. So almost a free plant from your original plant. But I don't need that, so we will compost it. Moving up the plant, we have a small sucker here, small sucker here. Here's another one. There's a little bitty one growing in between here. Trying to look it over. That's all the ones that I'm going to get rid of. Now what I'll show you here, here's one that I'm going to leave. This is towards the tip top of the plant. The reason I say I'm going to leave this, it's almost spread too much, and I'm afraid if I take this off, it will cause more harm than good. But this is one out of 37 tomato plants down. Look at these. Already putting on some blossoms. So I'm gonna hop back and complete the rest of my row. And this is what I took off of just this one plant. Not many right now, but all the energy we just saved from that plant. Another thing to note, if your suckers get too large, instead of pinching and pulling them off with your fingers, you may want to use pruners, because any additional damage you do to your tomato plants, you're just opening it up for diseases and other harm and issues. So if they get too much bigger than my pinky, I will use pruners on them. But in a perfect world, you would get the suckers whenever they're super tiny. And hopefully that will be the case the rest of summer. And that's a wrap for this week's garden tour. Now I do have to include one more little addition. When I planted everything, got it all in the garden, Darren said, as he looked around, he said, "Did you plant any jalapeno peppers?" I personally do not like hot, spicy things. So for me, that's not the top of my list. I did have jalapenos a couple years ago. They did great. I dehydrated several of them. So I thought there was no need to plant anymore. But since he asked me, I thought, well, I guess I better plant something. So I didn't have anything set out in the garden for jalapenos. But I went ahead and got a little pot that I'm just going to keep in the garden here. And here's his jalapeno plant with blooms on it. This will be my first year growing a jalapeno pepper plant in a pot, but there's a first for everything. As with all gardens and gardening in general, it's kind of an experiment every year, in my opinion. You're constantly learning, trying new things, and this will just be another addition to our experiments this year. That wraps it up. I will bring you along next week for another update and see how far things come in the next week. As always, take care. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure to like this video, give it a thumbs up, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. And until next time, happy gardening.